The morning my wife was buried, my daughter handed me a manila envelope and told me I had 30 days to clear out of the only home I'd ever owned. Inside that envelope was a deed to a boarded-up hardware store in a town I'd never set foot in, while she kept the 4-bedroom colonial in Chevy Chase worth $2.8 million. She called me a burden in front of the funeral director, so I drove 6 hours west to that dead little store. But when I forced the back door open and turned on my flashlight, my knees buckled at what my wife had hidden inside. Hey everybody, welcome back. Before we get started, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and let me know down in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories reach. Quick heads up before we begin. Parts of this story have been dramatized for the telling, but the heart of it, the thing that matters, is real enough. Now let me tell you about the day everything I thought I knew about my family fell apart. The lawyer's office smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. I remember that more than anything else from that afternoon. Margaret had been gone 11 days, and I still kept turning to say something to her, still kept reaching for a hand that wasn't there. 41 years of marriage does that to you. It rewires your whole body around another person, and then they're gone and your hands don't know what to do anymore. I sat across from a young attorney named Theodora Wren, fresh out of some good school by the look of her, with a folder squared up neatly in front of her. On my right sat my daughter Bethany and her husband Craig, both of them leaning forward like greyhounds at the gate. Bethany had her phone face down on her knee, but she kept glancing at it. I noticed that. A man notices when his only child can't sit through the reading of her mother's will without checking the time. "Thank you all for coming," Theodora said. "We'll be reading the last will and testament of Margaret Ann Coffey, executed 14 months ago." 14 months. That stopped me cold for a second. 14 months ago, Margaret was still strong, still gardening, still beating me at gin rummy every Thursday. She'd already known something. She'd already made plans I knew nothing about. Theodora cleared her throat and began. "To my daughter, Bethany Coffey Mercer, I leave the family residence at 14 Aldrich Lane, Chevy Chase, Maryland, appraised at $2,800,000. Bethany exhaled like she'd been holding her breath underwater. Craig actually patted her knee. "Additionally," Theodora went on, "the brokerage accounts held at Whitmore Capital, current value approximately $4,100,000, and the contents of the residence, with 2 exceptions noted below." I did the math in my head. Old accountant's habit, even though I taught shop class for 31 years, not arithmetic. Nearly $7 million to my daughter. And I sat there waiting, because there had to be more. There had to be something for me. The man Margaret had slept beside for 4 decades. Theodora turned a page. "To my husband Walter Coffey," and here my heart climbed right up into my throat. "I leave the commercial property located at 220 Front Street, Linden Falls, West Virginia, a former hardware store and the residence above it. County assessed value, $31,000. The room went so quiet I could hear the radiator ticking." Craig laughed. He actually laughed, this short, ugly bark, before he caught himself. "That's it," Bethany said. She wasn't even pretending to be sad anymore. "A junk shop in West Virginia? Dad gets a shack and I get the house?" "The will is very specific," Theodora said evenly. "Your mother spent considerable time on the language." "It's an insult is what it is," Bethany said. And then she looked at me and Lord help me, I'll never forget the look on her face. Pity. My daughter looked at me with pity, like I was something the cat had dragged in. "Dad, you can't even take care of yourself anymore. You burned the kitchen towel last month. You're 67 years old. What are you going to do with a falling down store in the middle of nowhere?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I wanted to defend Margaret, to say she must have had her reasons, but my throat had closed up. "There's also a sealed letter," Theodora said, sliding a cream-colored envelope across the desk to me. "Your wife's instructions were explicit. It is to be opened only at the property, not before." I picked it up. Margaret's handwriting on the front, that careful slanted cursive she'd learned from nuns 60 years ago. Just 3 words. "Walter. Open inside." My hands were shaking. Bethany stood up and grabbed her coat. Whatever, I'm calling our lawyer. This is clearly not what Mom would have wanted if she'd been thinking straight. Your mother, Theodora said, and there was steel in it now, was evaluated by 2 physicians for capacity at the time of signing at her own request. The will is airtight. Contesting it would cost you a great deal and change nothing. That shut Bethany up, but only for a moment. At the door, she turned back to me. Enjoy your dump, Dad. Don't call me when the roof caves in. And she was gone, Craig trailing after her. I stayed in that chair a long while. Theodora let me. Finally, she reached into a drawer and set an old brass key on the desk in front of me. She wanted you to have this directly, and she told me to tell you something, word for word. The young woman looked uncomfortable. She said, tell Walter the store was never about the money. Tell him to look behind the workbench. Behind the workbench. I had no idea what that meant. I drove home that night to the house on Aldrich Lane, except it wasn't home anymore. It belonged to Bethany now. 40 years of our life. The door frame where we penciled her height every birthday. The kitchen where Margaret made her terrible pot roast every Sunday. And I ate every bite and told her it was wonderful. All of it Bethany's. I slept in the guest room at night because I couldn't bring myself to lie in our bed without her. The trouble started fast. 3 days after the funeral, I came downstairs to find men in coveralls carrying boxes out the front door. Bethany stood on the porch with a clipboard. What's going on? I asked. A stick clean out, she said, not looking up. I'm putting the house on the market. Craig and I are buying something bigger in Bethesda. One of the men walked past me carrying Margaret's sewing machine, the old singer her own mother had given her. Wait, I said. That's your grandmother's machine. Your mother loved that thing. Bethany glanced at it. It's junk, Dad. Goodwill if they'll take it, dumpster if they won't. I watched them carry out Margaret's whole life in cardboard boxes. Her cookbooks with her notes in the margins. The quilt she'd made when Bethany was born. A man came down the stairs with a framed photograph, our wedding picture, Margaret in that yellow dress she'd sewn herself because we couldn't afford a real gown in 1982. That one, I said. Please, can I have that one? The man stopped and looked at Bethany. She walked over, took the frame from his hands, and looked at it for half a second. The frame's sterling, she said, worth a couple $100. She slid the photo out, dropped it onto the porch, and handed the empty frame back to the worker. He can have the picture. I bent down and picked our wedding photo up off the cold concrete. Margaret was 23 in that picture, laughing at something I'd said, her whole life ahead of her. I held it to my chest and went back inside, and I'll tell you the truth. That was the moment something broke in me. Not the will, not the insult. The picture on the concrete. That night Bethany knocked on the guest room door and came in without waiting. She had a folder. I talked to a lawyer about your situation, she said. My situation. Dad, let's be honest, you can't live alone. Mom did everything. You don't cook, you don't manage money, you forget things. She set the folder on the bed. I found a place. Cedar Ridge, out near Frederick. Assisted living. They have activities, meals, the whole thing. I opened the folder. Brochures. Photographs of a brick building, an old man in a wheelchair staring at a television. A contract with my name already typed on it. Resident, Walter Coffey. Monthly, $3,200. Who's paying $3,200? Who's paying $3,200 a month? I asked. That's the thing. She sat on the edge of the bed. There's a power of attorney here. You sign it, I handle everything. The store, your accounts, the bills, you don't have to worry about a single thing ever again. I looked at the second document. General Durable Power of Attorney. And down near the bottom, one word in bold, irrevocable. I might have taught shop, but I read everything, every contract, every warranty, every line. 40 years of marriage to a careful woman teaches you to read the fine print. This says irrevocable, I said, means I can never undo it. It means it's stable, she said quickly. For everybody. I noticed the date in the corner. The lawyer had drafted this thing 9 days before Margaret died. 9 days. While my wife lay in hospice with tubes in her arm, my daughter was already in some attorney's office arranging to take everything I had left and lock me in a home. I closed the folder and slid it back across the bed. No. Her face changed then. The soft concern dropped away like a mask. Dad, don't be difficult. A judge can declare you incompetent. You're a widower. You're alone. You've got no income to speak of. It would take 72 hours. Sign it the easy way, or I'll do it the hard way. Get out of my room, I said. It's my room now, she said. It's my room now, she said. But she left. I sat there a long time holding that brass key and the sealed letter. Looked behind the workbench. The store was never about the money. I didn't understand any of it, but I understood one thing. My wife had seen something coming that I had been too trusting to see, and she had left me a map. The next morning I packed what little was truly mine, my tools mostly. A man who teaches shop for 31 years has good tools, and Bethany hadn't bothered to take those. My clothes, the wedding photo, which I wrapped in a flannel shirt, and in the backyard where Margaret had kept her roses, I dug up the one she loved most, the deep red climber she'd planted the spring Bethany left for college, the year the house finally felt too quiet. I wrapped the roots in a feed sack and laid it in the bed of my truck. Bethany came out onto the porch in her robe. You're stealing landscaping now? It's a rose bush, I said. Whatever. Be out by the 30th or I'm changing the locks. She went back inside. The drive to Linden Falls took the better part of a day. Maryland gave way to the long green folds of West Virginia. Hills stacked on hills, little towns tucked into the hollows where the railroad used to matter. I passed coal trucks and dollar stores and churches with signs out front, quoting scripture. Linden Falls turned out to be one main street, a diner, a Baptist church, a post office, and a row of storefronts where half the windows were papered over. Toot-toot-toot. Front Street sat at the end of the row. The sign still hung crooked above the door, faded but readable. Coffee and Sons Hardware. I sat in the truck and stared at it. Coffee. That was my name. But I'd never owned a hardware store, never been to this town. And then it hit me like cold water. Sons. This had been my father-in-law's people, Margaret's family. The Coddles had come from somewhere out here, generations back, before her father moved him east. She'd never talked about it much, said there was nothing left out here but ghosts. The brass key fit the front lock like it had been waiting 40 years for my hand. The door swung open with a groan and the smell of dust and old machine oil rolled out, and I'll be honest, for a second I just breathed it in. It smelled like my own classroom. It smelled like work. Inside, the shelves still held merchandise under a gray skin of dust. Boxes of nails, coils of rope, and tools hung neatly on a pegboard, every one in its place. Somebody had closed this store up careful, not in a hurry. The afternoon light came through the dirty front windows in long gold bars, and there in the back was a heavy oak workbench, scarred and oil-stained, the kind they don't make anymore. Look behind the workbench. I crossed the room. The bench was bolted to the floor, but the wall behind it was paneled in old pine boards, and one section didn't quite match. I ran my fingers along the seam and found a notch, and when I pulled, a panel swung outward on hinges somebody had hidden well. Behind it was a recess in the wall, and in the recess sat a steel strongbox, military green with a combination lock. My hands were shaking again. I sat down on a crate, took out the sealed letter, and broke it open right there. Walter, it began in Margaret's hand. My darling, stubborn, trusting man. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and Bethany has already shown you who she's become. I'm sorry. I had hoped I was wrong. I prayed I was wrong. The combination is your birthday, the day you became mine, not the day you were born. June 11. Open the box, then sit down because there's a great deal you don't know. Trust me one more time. I'm still taking care of you, even now. All my love, always, Margaret. 6/11. Our wedding day. I spun the dial, and the lock clicked open. Inside were 4 folders, each labeled in Margaret's careful hand. The first said Mineral Rights. The second said Bethany. Read first. The third said Halverson. The fourth said Trust. Helen has copies. And resting on top of all of them, another envelope with my name on it. I opened my name first. Walter, by now you've seen the store and you're wondering why on earth I left you a dead shop in coal country. Sit tight. First thing you need to understand, this building sits on 40 acres my grandfather bought in 1931, and that land has never been touched. There's a coal seam under it, but coal's not the half of it. 18 months ago, a geological survey came back. There's a natural gas formation under those 40 acres, Walter. Marcellus Shale, the kind that's made men in this state rich. A clean estimate puts the recoverable value somewhere north of $19 million. I've already signed a development agreement with a company I trust, Allegheny Ridge Energy. They handle everything. You keep 70% of net royalties. The man you'll meet is named Theo Halverson. He's good people. Trust him. I had to stop reading. $19 million. I looked around at the dusty shelves, the cobwebs, the broken light fixture hanging by its wires, and I started to laugh. And then the laugh turned into something else, because the next folder was the one marked Bethany. Read first. I opened it. The top page was a timeline in Margaret's handwriting, and as I read it, the laughter died in my chest for good. Our daughter had been stealing from us for 2 years. The timeline was meticulous, the way Margaret did everything. March of 2 years back, $40,000 wired from our home equity line, a signature on the authorization that wasn't mine and wasn't Margaret's. The loops were wrong, Margaret had written in the margin. He taught me to spot a forgery years ago, bless him. August, $65,000 from the brokerage account, a forged power of attorney submitted to Whitmore Capital. There was a photograph, grainy, from a bank's security camera. Bethany at a teller window in a navy coat. The following spring, $90,000 more drained from a retirement account using a hardship claim filed 3 days after Margaret's cancer diagnosis. 3 days. While I sat in a waiting room praying, my daughter was at a bank forging her dying mother's name. The total at the bottom, circled twice. $241,000. And below it, a note. I found this 14 months ago. I never said a word. I wanted to be wrong about her so badly that I let her think she'd gotten away clean. Then I built this. Forgive me for not telling you while I lived, Walter. You'd have wanted to confront her, and she'd have run, and I needed her to keep believing she had time. I needed to set the trap properly. I sat in that dusty store as the light went orange and then gray, and I read every page. The folder marked Halverson was the energy deal, contracts and surveys and a partnership agreement with my name on a line waiting for my signature. The folder marked Trust explained the rest, and it was the part that made me understand just how far ahead of all of us my wife had thought. She'd put the West Virginia property and the mineral rights into an irrevocable trust 18 months before she died, titled in my name alone. No power of attorney could touch it. No guardianship could reach it. And there was a clause, Section 11, that she'd had a lawyer draft with particular care. If Bethany contested the will, or pursued guardianship over me, or attempted to defraud the estate in any way, she would forfeit every cent of the $7 million she'd just inherited, and the documented evidence of her embezzlement would be turned over to the FBI. Margaret had named the agent. There was a business card paper clipped to the page. Special Agent Dolores Yancey, Financial Crimes, Pittsburgh Field Office. My wife had not just protected me. She had built a cage around our daughter so quietly and so completely that Bethany was already inside it and didn't even know. I'll be honest with you. I cried that night, not for the money, for the years, for the little girl who used to ride on my shoulders at the county fair, who I'd taught to use a coping saw when she was 8, holding her small hands in mine. I cried because somewhere along the way that girl had decided her own father was an obstacle to be moved, and her own dying mother was an account to be drained. And I cried because Margaret had carried all of this alone, sick and frightened, so that I wouldn't have to. That first night I slept on a cot in the apartment above the store, with the rose bush sitting in its feed sack by the door waiting for morning, and a place in the ground. I'd been there 2 days getting the water turned on and the worst of the dust cleared when a pickup pulled up out front and a big man in his 60s climbed out, gray-bearded, in a canvas jacket. He stuck out a hand the size of a catcher's mitt. "Theo Halverson," he said. "Allegheny Ridge. You'd be Margaret's Walter." And I would. He looked at me a long moment and his eyes got soft. "She was something, your wife. Drove out here a dozen times that last year, sick as she was, making sure every comma was right." He shook his head. "She told me," she said, "Theo, my husband's the most decent man I ever met and the worst liar, and there are people who will try to take what's his the minute I'm gone. You watch out for him." So here I am. He set a thermos and a sack of sandwiches on the tailgate. "Figured you hadn't eaten, right? I'll tell you, after the week I'd had, that plain kindness near about undid me. Theo told me things over those sandwiches, that Bethany and Craig had been out here themselves 3 weeks before Margaret passed, asking questions at the county courthouse about mineral rights and deeds, that a man named Garrison Pyle, who ran a competing land company over in the next county, had been sniffing around the coffee acreage for 2 years, that Pyle and Craig had been seen having lunch together in Charleston. The pieces were fitting together, and the picture they made was ugly. Bethany hadn't just been greedy. She'd known about the gas. She'd known the dead store was worth 20 times the Colonial in Chevy Chase. She'd taken the house and pushed the store on me thinking I was too foolish to ever find out, planning to have me declared incompetent and take the store too, through a power of attorney, before I knew what I was sitting on. Margaret had counted on exactly that. She'd given Bethany the obvious treasure so that her greed would blind her to the real one. They came on a Saturday morning. I heard the cars before I saw them, 2 of them, Bethany's white Lexus and a black truck I didn't know. I was out front, kneeling in the dirt by the door, planting Margaret's rosebush in a patch of sun. I didn't get up. Bethany got out first, all business. A thin, sharp-faced man in an expensive vest climbed out of the truck. "That'd be Pyle," I figured. "Dad," Bethany said, "we need to talk. This has gone on long enough." I patted the dirt down around the rows and stood, brushing my knees, mourning. The thin man stepped forward with an oily smile. "Mr. Coffey, my name's Garrison Pyle. I represent some development interests in the region. I understand you've come into this property, and I'd like to take a real burden off your hands. I'm prepared to offer you cash today. $200,000 for the building and the acreage. More than fair for a closed-up store. $200,000 for $19 million in gas." I looked at him, then at my daughter. "You brought him here." "He's offering you a fortune, Dan," Bethany said. "Take it, move into Cedar Ridge. Let me handle the paperwork. You'll never have to think about money again." I reached into my shirt pocket and took out my phone. I'm not a man who knows much about gadgets, but Theo's nephew had shown me how to work the voice recorder, and I'd had it running since the cars pulled up. "Before anybody signs anything," I said, "I want you both to hear something." And I held up the phone and pressed play on a different recording, one Theo's nephew had pulled clean off a voicemail Bethany had left for Craig and accidentally copied to my old shared number months back, a thing I hadn't even known existed until 2 days ago. Bethany's own voice came out of the little speaker, tinny but clear. "The survey says 19 million, Craig, maybe more. We give the old man the store, get the POA, put him in the home, and Pyle buys us out clean. He'll never know what's under it. Dad couldn't find his own keys most days." I stopped it. You should have seen their faces. The blood went right out of Bethany's. Pyle took a step back from her like she was on fire. "That recording," I said, "and a good deal more, is already with the FBI. A special agent Yancey, out of Pittsburgh. Your mother saw to it." I looked at my daughter, and I made myself keep my voice steady, the way Margaret would have wanted. She knew everything, Bethany. The 40,000, the 65, the retirement account she drained 3 days after they told her she was dying. She knew it all, and she wrote it all down. Bethany's mouth opened and closed. That's Mom was confused. She didn't She was the least confused person I ever met, I said. That's when the third car arrived, a plain sedan, and out of it stepped Theodora Wren, the young lawyer from Maryland with a thick portfolio under her arm, and beside her a woman in a gray suit with a badge clipped to her belt. "Bethany Mercer," the woman said. "Special Agent Dolores Yancey. I'd like a word." Theodora stepped up beside me and addressed the whole sorry lot of them in that even courtroom voice. "Mr. Coffey, I'm here to inform you that as of this morning, the conditions of Section 11 of the Caudle Coffee Trust have been triggered. By contesting the will and by conspiring to defraud your father, Bethany Mercer has forfeited her entire inheritance. The residence on Aldrich Lane, the brokerage accounts, all of it reverts to the estate, and from there, per your wife's instructions, to you." She turned to Bethany. "You'll be hearing from the probate court Monday." And she nodded at the agent from other parties considerably sooner. Pyle was already walking backward toward his truck. "I'm not part of any of this," he was saying. "I made a legitimate offer, that's all. We'll talk about your offers too, mister." "Pyle," Agent Yancey said, "don't leave the county." Bethany looked at me then, and for just a second I saw her at 8 years old holding a fishing rod too big for her, looking up at me to bait the hook. Then the second passed, and she was a grown woman who'd robbed her dying mother, and there was nothing in her face but fear for herself. "Dad," she said, "Daddy, please, you can't do this to me. I'm your daughter, and here's the thing I want you to understand, because I've thought about it every day since. There was a part of me that wanted to fold. That's a father's curse. You love them, even when they've given you every reason not to. But I thought about Margaret, sick and scared, driving these mountain roads alone to build a wall around a foolish, trusting old man, because she knew he couldn't build it himself. And I thought, I will not waste what she did. I will not hand it back the first time this girl says Daddy. You were my daughter," I said. "You stopped being that a long time before today. You just thought I was too dumb to notice." I turned to the agent. "Whatever you need from me, you've got it." They led Bethany to the sedan. She was crying, but I'd seen her cry to get her way since she was 3, and I let it roll off me like rain off a tin roof. Craig, when they found him, took a deal and testified against both his wife and Pyle to save his own skin, which surprised exactly nobody. Bethany pled out in the end. 18 months in a federal facility for wire fraud and forgery, and in order to repay every dollar she'd taken from her mother, which she'll be paying back the rest of her natural life. Pyle's company got hit with charges of its own. Margaret had documented his dealings too. That woman missed nothing. I signed the partnership with Allegheny Ridge that spring. They put the first well in by summer. The day it came on, Theo drove me out to the pad, and we stood there in the noise and the wind, and he clapped me on the back, and I thought about a girl in a yellow dress laughing at something I'd said in 1982, and I said out loud, "We did it, Margaret." The wind took it off down the hollow. The royalties come quarterly now. Real money, more than a shop teacher ever dreamed of. The house in Chevy Chase came back to me. I sold it. I couldn't sleep in it knowing what had happened there. I live above the store in Linden Falls. I fixed the place up, opened it back as a hardware store 3 days a week, not for the money, but because a man needs somewhere to be and something to hand across a counter. The local kids come in for nails and advice, and I give them both. And I did something with the rest. I sat down with Theodora Wren, and we set up a fund in Margaret's name, the Margaret Caudle Coffee Foundation. We pay for the trade school over in the county seat. Welding, electrical, plumbing, the kind of work that builds a life and can't be shipped overseas. First year, we put 11 young people through. One of them, a quiet girl named Junie, who'd been sleeping in her car, finished top of her welding class and got hired on at the gas operation, making more her first year than I made my last year teaching. She came by the store to thank me, and I had to go in the back so she wouldn't see an old man cry. I keep Margaret's rosebush by the front door. It took to the West Virginia soil better than anyone expected. Blooms red every June, right around the 11th. People ask me sometimes if I've forgiven Bethany. I'll tell you what I've come to. I don't carry hate for her, because hate is a stone you make yourself carry, and I'm too old for the weight. But forgiveness, real forgiveness. That's a thing you offer someone who's sorry for what they did, not for getting caught. My daughter has never once said she was sorry for hurting her mother. Only sorry it didn't work. So I wish her no harm, and I send a little money to the prison commissary because a man should, and I do not let her back into my life. And I've made my peace that those things can all be true at once. The good book says forgive, and I believe it, but it doesn't say be a fool twice, and Margaret didn't raise me to be one. Here's what that dead little store taught me, and it's the only thing I'd ask you to carry away from an old man's story. The most valuable things in your life are almost never the ones with the price tag everybody can see. My daughter looked at a Colonial and Chevy Chase and a shut-up shop in coal country and thought she knew which one was the prize. She had it exactly backward, the way greedy people always do, and the truest wealth I've got isn't under those 40 acres at all. It's a yellow dress and a photograph, and a woman who loved a trusting old fool enough to protect him from beyond the grave. If you're out there right now and somebody in your own family has shown you who they really are, I want you to hear me. It is not your failure that they chose to be that way. You can love someone and still refuse to let them destroy you. Those two things can live in the same heart. They live in mine. So plant your rose bush. Keep your eyes open. Trust the people who've earned it, and trust the ground under your feet to surprise you. And when the time comes that life shows you what someone is truly made of, believe them the first time. That's my story. The store's open Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday if you're ever passing through Linden Falls. I'll be the old man behind the counter by the red rose right where she left me. The day they led my daughter to that plain gray sedan, I kept waiting to feel like I'd won something. I never did. What I felt instead, standing there in the dirt with Margaret's rose bush newly planted by the door, was the slow understanding that none of this had been luck. Every piece of it had a cause, and the causes ran back years before I ever held that brass key. Bethany didn't end up in a federal facility because fate turned on her. She ended up there because of choices she made, one at a time, each one a little easier than the last. The first $40,000 made the next 65 thinkable. Lying to a sick mother made lying to a foolish father feel like nothing at all. That's how it works. Nobody wakes up a thief. You walk there one small permission at a time, and by the time you arrive, you've forgotten the road. I watched my own child walk that road, and the hardest truth I've had to swallow is that I can't blame the world for where it led her. She chose every step. And Margaret, sick as she was, frightened as she must have been, chose differently. That's the thing I want you to take from an old man who learned it too late to teach his own daughter. The life you end up with is mostly the sum of what you decided to do when nobody was forcing your hand. I've come to believe a person needs 3 things to come through something like this hole. The first is a backbone, plain old refusal to bend just because someone you love is crying and calling you Daddy. I almost folded a dozen times. Wanting to be good to your children can make you weak in exactly the wrong moment. And I had to learn that loving Bethany and protecting myself from her were 2 different jobs. The second is the sense to look past the shiny thing to the real one. Bethany saw a Colonial worth millions and a dead store worth nothing. And she grabbed the obvious prize so fast she never asked why her careful mother had given it to her. Margaret counted on exactly that. Greed makes a person stupid, and clear eyes make a person free. I'd rather be the man who reads the fine print than the one who signs first and weeps later. And the third is the steadiness to keep standing when the floor's gone out from under you. I was 67, widowed, alone, and told I was useless. I could have believed it. Plenty of men would have. Instead, I turned a key and got to work, because work was the one thing I'd never let anybody take. So plant something living by your door. Tell the truth even when a lie would be cheaper. Keep your eyes open and your spine straight, and when somebody finally shows you who they are, do them the honor of believing it. That's not bitterness talking. That's just an old shop teacher who finally learned the lesson and lived to pass it on.